Hey there, if you are looking to create some 3D objects because you have a 3D printer or looking to get one, Tinkercad is a great way to get started into creating your own 3D objects. It is free. It is a web-based application. They do have apps for iOS and Android, and it's a program that allows you to start creating your own objects, your own 3D objects. Now, I've been supporting my high school students with Tinkercad for a while now, and I've identified 4 problems that tend to come up that cause frustrations for my students, and I want to address those today, as well as give you the tools in Tinkercad to get around that so you can go ahead and start creating your 3D objects. Let's go. One of the first challenges is just simply navigating around your build area or your build plate. So you start to work in certain areas or regions on certain objects, and before you know it, you want to move on to the next object or some other place on your build plate, and you just naturally just want to zoom out. And then you end up having to scroll over and drag over and reposition your camera so that you can see everything and then reposition your view to the next object. That does become annoying over time, and you feel like you're wasting a lot of time scrolling in and out of your screen. So rather than doing that, go ahead and select the Home View button. That will just take you out to view the entire plate, and then from there you can zoom on your next area. Another tool that you can use is if you can see the next object you want to view, if you click on it and then click the Fit View to Selected button, that will then move your camera to that selected object. And that's a great way, again, to move your way around your build plate or your build area. Select it and then select Fit View to view it next. All right, the next issue that comes up involves resizing objects when you start to use the click and drag. And what I mean by that, when you select an object, you can use these grab points here, these white small boxes at the corners here at the top of the object that allow you to basically click it and drag it to whatever size you would like. This does become a point of frustration for students when they're looking to set specific measurements or dimensions. For example, if you wanted to adjust the width of your object and you use this grab point, you can inadvertently change the other dimensions, the height and the length of your object accidentally as you click and drag this grab point. So one way around this is actually to use these smaller, darker boxes here, and you'll see that they're along the edges of the object, and as you click and drag that edge, it will only adjust that one dimension and leave the other 2 dimensions constant. Now you're also going to notice that as I adjust these dimensions, it will snap to certain increments that you can set down here in the bottom right-hand corner. I'm using metric right now, and by default it is set to 1 millimeter, but you can click on this and set it to other increments. So for example, if I set it to 5 millimeter increments, you're going to notice a much larger movement there as it snaps by every 5 millimeters. And often when students want to start getting into finer movements or finer details or finer adjustments, I encourage them to go to 0.1 millimeters, or they can turn it off altogether. Another approach, though, to setting object dimensions is to not use the click and drag, but rather select those grab points and click on the actual boxes that show the measurements and enter in those measurements manually. So if I wanted this to be a 25.3 millimeter side, I would just simply enter in 25.3 and click enter. So much easier. You don't have to fuss and muss with clicking and dragging, just enter in the value. Now, if you want to resize an object and maintain its proportions, here is another helpful hint. Because if I enter in a value here, let's say it's the width, I then will have to adjust that here as well. And of course, adjust it here as well. The easier thing to do is before you enter in any values, press and hold the Shift key and then click on a grab point and then enter in your specific measurement. And what that's going to do, it's going to preserve the proportions of your object and it will scale it up appropriately in both the height, width, and depth of your object. The next area of frustration for students is when it comes to trying to align objects with each other. For example, if I have this cube and I wanted to have this cube sitting on top of the other cube so that those surfaces are actually touching, that can be a huge source of frustration for students because they are needing to, using the click and drag, eyeball when that actually occurs. And I've seen students zoom in really close to try to see when those two objects are touching? Well, there is an easier way. We're going to use this tool here called the work plane tool. Let's set this aside here. In using the work plane tool, if I select it, it allows me to put this imaginary plane onto any surface that I would like. And so in this case, I want to place an object on the surface of this bottom block here. So as a result, I'm going to make that my work plane. Now, that becomes a helpful tool for us because what this allows us to do is figure out exactly when the bottom surface of this top block touches the surface or meets the surface of this bottom block. And when I grab this grab point here that allows me to bring it closer to the surface of that bottom block, you can see here that we have that reference measurement there. And in fact, rather than me trying to drag it to 0, why don't I just type in 0 to ensure that there is no distance or gap between the top block and the bottom block. Now, when you're done with this, just select the work plane tool again and just simply click on any empty space on your build plate and you're back. So another area of frustration when it comes to alignment is when you're setting pieces or objects inside of each other. And this is an example here. So I made one cube a hole and I want to have it sort of centered in the middle of this larger block. And if you just simply use the drag and click method, you can get it and you can eyeball it, but it's really hard to tell if you are dead center or not. You could be off by a millimeter, and depending what your increments are set to, it could be a 0.1 millimeter difference. So it becomes really hard to determine if it's dead center. Perhaps the easiest way of ensuring that you have proper alignment here is using the alignment tool. So I'm going to select these two objects and I'm going to click on this tool called Align. And when that happens, you have some reference points here along all 3 dimensions, your height, your width, and your depth. And right now, let's take a look at the front surface of this. I can align objects by their center points or by an outer edge. And so, for example, if I take and I click this click point here, you can see now that it has aligned those 2 objects by their outer edges here. Or if I want to go by their center points, they're now centered to each other. Similarly, I can do the same thing along this dimension. There they are. And by doing just those 2 simple clicks, I can now ensure that this hole here is in the center of this box. And the final one would be, in terms of height-wise, there they are there. So these are now 2 completely centered objects. Here is another tip on alignment. And again, it gets us away from simply clicking and dragging. It's helpful to know that if you need to move an object, for example, this large block here, and simply using the alignment tool or the work plane tool isn't going to allow you to do what you want to do, go ahead and use the arrow keys. The arrow keys become a helpful tool to use because it allows you again to be able to move your objects along specific planes of direction there without having to click and drag and run the risk of having something go out of alignment. Now here's the other thing, again, just be aware of what your increments of measurement are set to, because the smaller the increment, the smaller the degrees of movement every time you click your arrow keys. It's a simple tip, but it's good to know when you want to have precise movements and the click and drag is simply not going to cut it. Okay, the final area of frustration for new users that I want to cover is in the selection and grouping of objects. The most common way of doing it is click and drag. So I can simply press, click and drag this box across those 3 objects, and anything that is in that box has been selected. Now this is where the frustration can begin, because we could have inadvertently selected other objects that were not in our view. And this can happen a lot, especially as your projects start to get more and more complex. For example, if I just scroll to the top here, we have actually selected this sphere that is placed behind this box. And you can tell because as I move this, yeah, that sphere is selected. So how can you get around this? Well, you need to be more precise in your selections, and you can use the Shift key. By pressing and holding the Shift key, you can select specific objects in your selection. So let's start again. So if I were to go and press and hold my Shift key, I can click on the box, I can click on the hole, and I can click on this orange cylinder, and I know that I have just those 3 objects selected and not the sphere behind. I could also use the Shift key to unselect specific objects from my selection. If I wanted to unselect this orange object from my selection, I would press and hold the Shift key and click on that. And now I would just have the red box and the hole selected. Now this comes in handy for situations like the grouping tool, where I have different objects selected and I want to group them together as one object. So in this case, if I selected all three objects and I were to group them, I would have here an object that looked like this. But I wanted this orange column to go all the way down through this hole in the box. So let's backtrack here. What I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to ensure that I only select the box and the hole by pressing and holding the Shift key, select the box, select the square-shaped hole, and not to select this orange column, and pressing the group tool. Now I have the appropriate shape that I wanted. So just being aware of what you select and being really precise in your selections by using the Shift key to either add objects or take away objects from your selection can be a huge help. So what's the final takeaway in all of this? Using click and drag is a very intuitive way of navigating this program. However, it is also a huge source of frustration when you want to start getting precise measurements, precise alignments, precise selections. You will need to start moving away from just simply clicking and dragging everything and using stuff like Shift keys or using the work plane tool or using the alignment tool. These tools are tools in Tinkercad that will help you and prevent you from getting too frustrated when you want a specific look, when you want a specific alignment or arrangement. You can do it, and you can do it precisely using those tools. All right, I hope that helped. Good luck, and we'll see you next time.